Hey, just putting this in at the top of the show because we put this episode together a while ago and then all of a sudden the government went and finally released the results of the GRA consultation and Liz Truss announced her actual plans for GRA reform. So, had to add something at the top to reference it because it would be pretty fucking weird if we didn't. But we haven't put together a full analysis of anything because, to be honest with you, I'm too fucking angry. The plans for reforms, thankfully, do not feature a bathroom bill, like many of us feared, but they essentially equate to the GRA being left almost entirely as it is. 5 years ago, I covered the evidence sessions from the 2015 Trans Equality Parliamentary Inquiry, and I believe that I was the only journalist there, and I was barely a journalist at that point. I didn't know how to report anything. Other people may have reported on it, but I didn't see anybody else except me there. It was there during that inquiry that the GRA reform thing really kicked off, and I watched as the government chose to make GRA reform a thing because they believed it would be an easy fight and an easy way to improve trans people's lives in the short term. But honestly, they were doing it because they wanted to rehabilitate the Conservative Party's image on LGBT stuff, and they were riding a pretty good wave at the time because gay marriage had only been a thing for 2 years and they wanted more of that. So they thought that they could use us. Then I saw that they faced resistance when the press and the people in their own fucking party started giving fringe weirdo wankers a platform where they essentially put out the fiction that birth certificates are the thin line protecting cis women from being sexually assaulted. And that nonsense won. I watched it go from a minor inquiry that nobody gave a fuck about to a national shitfit because cisgender people seemingly believed birth certificates stopped rape. Over the summer, Liz Truss tried to get the cabinet and racist liar / Prime Minister Johnson to agree to something much worse, a fucking bathroom bill. She leaked it to the Times. That isn't speculation. She actually did that. I know it for a fact she did. Because the cabinet got spooked when suddenly everyone who had ever met a trans person started sending them emails and letters, and Truss hoped to stir up support for her bullshit bathroom bill from the public. But thanks to all the work done, all the letters, the campaigning, the lobbying and the protests, the cabinet shut that shit down. But her plans directly caused a significant uptick in the amount of suicidal trans people that approached me and the pod in general through Twitter, the Discord or whatever. The trans community stepped up, but the things Truss did certainly damaged the mental health of many people out there and probably got people killed. Over the last 5 years, I've read suicide notes all over the place. I shouldn't have read them, and they shouldn't have been shared, and I told them they shouldn't share them. But they were shared and I read them anyway. Everyone mentioned the toxic media landscape that came as a result of the government wanting to score some easy LGBT cookies and then bailing the second it got hard and letting the press lie about it for 4 years. People died. I know people who died. I almost died because cisgender politicians and cisgender journalists and editors used us for their own fucking ends, and I cannot stop thinking about those people who would be with us today if this never happened. I don't know what reforms would have been worth, the cost to all of us and the cost to those who are no longer with us. But doing nothing? Fuck you, Liz Truss. And fuck anyone who voted for these fuckers who have left hundreds of thousands dead over the last 10 years through austerity and through shitty, horrible management of COVID-19. I am so angry, I can't even bear to open the consultation results. I literally tried to watch Liz Truss take questions on this in Parliament just now, and I couldn't get through more than 5 seconds of it without closing my browser in disgust. So this is my long-winded way of saying next week we will have analysis. This week I'm going to be trying to get my rage down so I can actually do that analysis without punching holes in walls. But till then, look after yourselves and try to remember that we aren't alone. It can feel that way, but the honest truth is we have allies, and I know the amazing cis allies we talk to over the next 2 episodes will be just as angry as I am over this. So please sit back and enjoy our chats with cool people who have gone above and beyond for us. I know I will be trying to think of them and think of the other people that have been with us over the coming days. That's enough rage for now. Enjoy the episode!
What the trans, darling?
Greetings and a very time zone appropriate welcome to you. Hello, and this is What the Trans.
What the trans? We spoke to famous people
we did speak to famous people who are considerably more famous than we are, and it was kind of shocking, really. We'll get onto that in a minute. But yeah, this is a fun episode. This is another one of our lovely, jaunty cis ally specials, because we wanted to do something actually quite cheerful and hopeful. Crazy concept for us, but I think we managed to get our heads around it. But yeah, how have you been, Michelle?
I'm good. I moved house. I moved to an undisclosed location in South London, and I've just finished unpacking all of my things, and right now everything is really tidy. But as a person who lives in chaos, I have no idea how the fuck to operate my bedroom where everything is easily accessible and I can see everything, and I don't know how to live like that.
When you sent me the photographs, I just assumed that you'd gone to somebody else's flat or something and said, "Hey, listen, I'm trying to trick my co-presenter. Can I just get a photograph of your apartment?" But no, lo and behold, that's not an easy task, of course, getting all of that sorted in terms of, putting it into boxes.
But I have an ADHD tip, which is something I kind of stumbled into when I was unpacking. I have made station in my new place where I have a station in my bedroom, which is where I do my makeup and my jewellery and all of that stuff. Then I have, the bathroom is another station in itself now, but everyone has a bathroom station, so that doesn't really feel like good reporting. But in the front room, there is another station where I have my keys attached to the wall, headphones, my face mask, because we live in COVID world, we should all wear masks.
Indeed, yep.
And also all my shoes and my bag. So I basically have these 3 stations that I go to before leaving the house, and that has changed everything.
Impressive.
I am now only 5 minutes late to things instead of 20 because of this one little move. So ADHD people, if you're listening, make stations that you hit every time you leave the house, because you'll never ever lose your keys again. But apart from ADHD advice time with Michelle, Ashleigh, I hear you have become a music video director.
I have indeed. I have been getting arty. Long-term listeners of the show will probably be aware that I am in a band, and it is super cool and awesome, and honestly I'm loving it. And we're called St. Lucifer, and we actually played Trans Pride Brighton, the performance for which is available on YouTube, fact fans. But we have of course been working on some new material. I've mentioned that we've finished our album. Woo! It's gone off to the mastering, it's all done in that sense. So now we are doing the promo for it. So a couple of weeks ago, I made a music video with a couple of friends of mine, and yes, that will be out on an as yet indeterminate date at some point towards the end of September. So yes, that has been tremendous fun. There's been a lot of band stuff. So what you tend not to hear about with being in a band is the amount of admin. Because you tend to think, oh, it's a band, it's all kind of chaotic, and everybody just turns up and gets drunk and plays their gets drunk, or inebriated on their recreational chemical of choice. Just play some music and it's all fairly chaotic. But actually, when you're doing a band that's doing releases and, trying to promote things like that, there is so much admin. We had a conversation in the band group chat, which spanned several days worth all told, about fonts, basically, about what style of writing are we going to use. And I was like, wow, this is interesting conversation to be having in context, I suppose. But yeah, I think we spent rather too long on it, particularly given that in the end the decision didn't really change it much.
I can imagine, with the podcast, people think that making the podcast is just this, us two talking, but no, there is all so much other bullshit that goes into making this podcast that we both love, and we are not complaining. I'm not complaining, but there's always more to a project, a creative project, than may first appear, and that I can imagine Absolutely. That was quite oh shit, we now got to learn how to do video effects and stuff. That's not what I signed up for. Where's the cocaine?
Kind of, although story for another time. Anyway, yeah, it was kind of like that. I think what's helped out is that the other members of the band are also quite arty and just kind of have a load of stuff hanging around that might be helpful, like camera tripods and whatever. But it was all just, I just filmed this whole thing on my phone. But we used some very, very fancy editing software to do things to it in the hands of somebody that very much knows how to use said software. So that's why it looks so good, I think. I think that's the key thing. Yeah, I don't know how much I could say, or even if I'm allowed to say this, but I have seen the video and I really enjoyed it. It does some really interesting things, and for a first-time director, at college, I did the whole music video module and stuff, and at uni, I've made music videos before and sat there for hours of other people's at the end of term showcase or whatever. Yeah. And I gotta say, Ashleigh, I'm very fucking impressed, because for a first time, I've seen a lot of first times, and they don't usually turn out like that, so congratulations, and I can't wait for people to see it. Thank you very much. Well, neither can I, and obviously the main thing I've got to do, and in fact on my to-do list immediately as soon as we finish the recording, is quite the treatment for the next St. Lucifer video, so that's delightful. The other thing that I've been doing, I would say, which is probably going to cheer a bunch of people up because I know what our fan base is like, you bunch of nerds. I've been playing roleplay games, many roleplay games, mostly Star Trek Adventures, which is tremendous. It's just tremendous fun. You kind of not really got into it yet.
You can't see this, but on the Zoom that I'm looking at Ashleigh, I'm just seeing her eyes light up with such tremendous joy. Yeah. It is a pleasure to see.
I forgot that we still had the video open. Yeah. Oh, whoops. But yeah, it's been super, but there's this other one I've picked up called Tales from the Loop, which is kind of like Stranger Things in Sweden. It's very weird. I like it. We haven't done a run of that yet, but it'll be fun. There's The Expanse, which it turns out running a game campaign in the setting of The Expanse is maddeningly complicated, so that's on a bit of a break. But because of all of the Star Trek recently, I have made a couple of purchases. To wit, I now own a Starfleet uniform.
It was only a matter of time.
It was only a matter of time, and I knew this, and frankly, I've just been waiting for the excuse. But also, just today, Michelle does not know about this yet, I've got my Vulcan ears, so they're coming as well.
They better become like part of your regular like cycle of clothes.
I mean, I can see it, yeah. I'm tempted to wear them for job interviews, but keep my hair down, so nobody can actually tell, are those ears a little, because it's slightly obscured, and then just a little thing for the interviewers to consider.
If no other reason, they'll hire you because they wouldn't know what the fuck's happening with your ears.
What's going on with my ears, yeah, and then I can ask, why are they so obsessed with our ears? Which, if you've watched Enterprise, will be slightly amusing, but not as amusing as the fact that you sat through Enterprise.
I'm not going to lie, you may have alienated so many of our listeners by referring to what is widely known as the worst Star Trek series, but I love your enthusiasm nonetheless.
Unpopular opinion, Enterprise had its good moments. The theme song was not one of them, and that is in fact what the skip intro button on streaming services was invented for, so people don't have to listen to that song in particular. But anyway, I should definitely stop gushing about Star Trek and music, and I think we should probably do a podcast. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, this is one of our periodic cis allies special. I didn't mean to sound so derisive when I said the word cis just then, although I'm conscious that is how it sounded. Anyway, apologies.
If anyone's going to understand it, it's the two people we've got on this one.
It absolutely is. And who are the two people we've got on this one?
Well, we have talking to me and Ashleigh today, the great Owen Jones, star columnist at The Guardian, although he probably hate me referring to him like that. He has been a trans ally for years. He is a big social justice guy on the left, big Corbyn guy, and a fighter for justice. Always. He's a columnist at a major paper who will also put on protests and show up for things, which makes him about 10 times better than most of the columnists out there in the other paper exist, because they just write the thing, get paid, then leave. He shows up.
And then fuck off to the home counties, yeah.
And he shows up for trans people on the regular at his cost, so we had to get him on to talk and thank him for that. But also, today we have Josie Long, comedian who I've been a particular fan of for well over 10 years now, when I first saw her doing the comedy circuit in London. And she's unique in the comedy world because her baseline is optimism and enjoying things. That seems to be her main message. But also, she was an interesting person to talk to because she actually came to grips with trans issues far earlier than most people.
Indeedy.
And we will get into how that happened when we get to my chat with her. But starting off,
I had a little chat with Owen Jones, as previously mentioned. So I think we should probably just get straight into it and chat about it afterwards. So let's play the tape. I am fairly certain that the majority of our audience is going to be familiar with who you are. But just for the benefit of those that might not be, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Owen Jones, and I write books and write articles for Guardian. I'm a columnist there. And also what I try to do in my work is to advance causes that I believe in for justice and equality, and to help platform people, minorities, causes and movements that are otherwise not just unrepresented, but demonized and attacked.
Yeah, indeed. So on that very subject then, can I ask when it was that you first really became aware of trans issues?
So I think shamefully quite late. I mean, just in terms of my own in terms of LGBTQ rights, I mean, I'm a queer person, but just in terms of general LGBTQ rights, I was a relative latecomer in lots of ways. I came out when I was 20, And I had a lot of internalized homophobia for a very long time after that, which I had to deal with. So I had to go through that stage, let alone then have a proper understanding of trans rights and trans issues, because I was someone like a lot of, we grow up in a society which tries to drum into our head that we're not equal, that we're, we hear homophobia and transphobia from the earliest age, and that you internalize a lot of shame and a lot of disgust about who you are often, and that has very damaging mental effects. As we know, the level of mental distress amongst LGBTQ people, particularly trans people, is much higher than the rest of the population, and equally self-medication with drug and alcohol abuse as a consequence. So I think it was, as I said, in terms of shamefully, even when I started as a columnist at The Independent, I think it took a while for me to consistently champion gay rights, let alone anything else. So I think the first proper article I wrote in support of trans people and trans rights was 2015. And that was to mark, under Ruth Hunt's excellent leadership of Stonewall, where Stonewall became a trans inclusive, as it always should have been, organisation, not just for LGB people. Just even saying the word LGB without T just feels hideous, but an LGBTQ rights organisation. So I wrote that article, and I'd already before that kind of understood, come to be someone who would regard myself as a strong supporter of trans rights, but didn't feel it was my lane to speak out, or I'd get it wrong. And I did get bits wrong in that, because I didn't understand at the time. I wrote trans sisters and brothers and inadvertently erased non-binary people in the process. So, and for me, it was very clear, and that how I came to the understanding of it was that the way trans people were being treated was so unbelievably reminiscent, hideously so, of the way that cisgender, lesbian, gay and bisexual people were treated in the 1980s and 1990s. The same tropes, the same attacks, biology is destiny, sexual predators, preying on children, brainwashing children, that it's a mental illness in terms of the form, not the side effects of the homophobia and transphobia, but being gay, bisexual, trans. So it was just, for me, it was just kind of like, wow, they're going through the same thing, the exact same systematic media onslaught that cisgender, gay, bisexual and lesbian people have always gone through. So yeah, that was for me. So, but when I wrote that article, it was my first insight into just how extreme and obsessive anti-trans people are. As soon as I wrote that article, they never let go, and they've never let go since. That one article caused a relentless, obsessive, and I'm not trying to present myself a victim here as a cisgender person on the receiving end of the kind of attacks by anti-trans people. But I looked and thought, oh my word, if they're doing this to me, what are they doing to trans people on the internet? So that for me was kind of, sorry, a bit long, but that's how I got there.
No, that's fine, and it does chime in with what several other people have said, cis and trans, in fact, in terms of internalizing so much of what you hear growing up, because there was definitely, I remember the press hostility and the kind of really awful tabloid stuff that was present in, the 90s and early 2000s, because that's when I was a kid and I was seeing, yeah, exactly. And so I was seeing that stuff in newsagents and occasionally in my relative's house splashed across the front pages, and I kind of knew that there was something queer about me, shall we say, even if I didn't have the words for it at the time, and it sort of pushes you back, doesn't it? And there's so much unlearning you've got to do. So,
I think of my first boyfriend. He came out when he was 15, and he was sent by his parents to a pseudo doctor to be cured of his homosexuality. And actually, when I met him at university, he seemed far more comfortable and assured with his sexuality. He wrote his English language thesis into the languageofgaydar.co.uk. But he then later on became addicted to crystal meth and had an awful kind of experience. And that just shows the damage that homophobia and transphobia can do. And it can be like a ticking time bomb for some people. But I felt as well, I mean, that's why I felt, again, linked to talking about trans stuff, that, you know, if you're an LGBTQ person with a media platform, then you have a responsibility to use that platform to support LGBTQ people when they're under attack.
In your opinion, as a man of the world, what's motivating this current wave of unbridled press hostility towards trans people?
It's an interesting question. I think the problem is, it's quite obviously transphobia is a global problem, but there's quite specific British features of it.
Yeah.
So in the United States, you have a very vociferous transphobic lobby, but they tend very strongly to be the Republican right, whilst American progressives tend to be supportive of trans people and trans rights. And that's not true in Britain. I mean, firstly, we have a largely editorially right-wing press. We have one of the most aggressive right-wing presses in the Western world. And the problem is then even the liberal wing of the media world, there is a lack of people who are supportive of trans rights. So you end up with people who obviously are the same people who baited gays and bait migrants and bait refugees and Muslims, and any other minority who gets picked on, they will pick on them. And they will relish doing so. And the one consistent theme always with these people, with their huge, overwhelming media platforms, their massive megaphones, their huge support amongst all the rest of their colleagues, is they will try and portray their bigotry as courage. That they are courageously dunking on besieged minorities who are bullied from the earliest age and suffer huge vulnerabilities and mental distress and consequences. And they try and portray that as, oh, you can't even speak out, as they write their millionth column on the subject, condemning another minority who lacks any real voice in the media. So I think the problem is there's a lack of progressive, that there's a lack of that. I mean, there's a generational divide, I would say, very clearly with feminism, which is that younger feminists tend to be very inclusive in their feminism in terms of, for example, women of colour, women, you know, the whole kind of spectrum of women, including trans women, and are very, you know, inclusive. But there is a generational divide, which is not really my position, obviously, as a cisgendered man to really go into detail about. But those younger women, people in their 20s and 30s, and certainly teens, for whom trans rights often is just an article of faith, they don't tend to be in editorial or senior positions within the media. So there's just a lack of that. And the other thing is that the anti-trans people have done a very good job in a very, for them, supported media environment, because it's so dominated by the reactionaries. But then to kind of go make anyone who is supported feel scared to talk about it. And they do this they coordinate complaints. They target anyone in the media who speaks out on trans rights and trans issues. They systematically try to hound within their own organizations to try and do everything they can to imperil their positions. They are, all I'd say, some of them at the moment are complaining of all the injustices to talk about in the world, about the Karen meme. And all I'd say about some of those people is, boy, do they like to speak to the manager. So they coordinate that. They coordinate that very effectively, and they make people feel scared to speak out. And they make it feel like, the other thing, for other people who are kind of not sure but instinctively supportive, they make them go, no, it's all very complicated and rah, 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 and muddy the waters and make it feel people don't have the confidence to talk about the issue. As though it's above their, you know, this is just too complicated for you to understand unless you're an expert, and they appoint themselves experts on this issue. So I think it's just the fact we have a very reactionary media ecosystem, and the most passionate supporters of trans people, as was the case with gay people in an earlier time, happen to be younger people, and those younger people tend to be the ones with don't have editorial control.
Yeah. No, that follows. I think you've kind of touched on everything that's sort of part of it there. I mean, I have asked myself why? What's actually motivated? Because, there are people who are crowdfunding, who are raising money to put adverts in the metro and whatever else. And I just wonder, why? Why do you hate trans people so much? But I don't think it is about hating trans people so much. It's because they are the same people that would have, had the same tactics in a different time pointed at the gay community. And it is just a reactionary thing.
It is. It's like, why do people hate gay people? I mean, it's complicated, and you kind of think, I mean, again, on the trans, and it's complicated. I mean, it is to do, obviously, with the rigid policing of, well, it's to do, I mean, just generally, though, I think, I do, there's so many injustices going on in the world. You've got poverty, you've got hunger, you've got mass insecurity, you've had austerity, all of which have disproportionately, we've got the climate emergency, the existential threat to humanity posed by it. We've got a pandemic, which has shut down human civilization. Yet, they're just of the one issue to pick. Like, are they going to lie on the deathbed thinking, oh, I wish I'd done more to one of the most oppressed minorities in the country, rather than, I don't know, doing something about all these other issues? I mean, especially I think about, so we've had austerity, which overwhelmingly affected women. We've got 1.4 million women suffer male violence, domestic violence a year, 600,000 sexually assaulted, up to 100,000 raped. We've got women concentrated in the lowest paid and most insecure jobs disproportionately. But we've got this of all the issues to focus on, this fixation with a very oppressed, very small minority is disturbing. And it is actually, they've intentionally shut down, like we're not having a conversation about those other things because they're filling this bandwidth where therefore trans people and trans allies have to keep having to talk about, to push back at their bigotry and their nonsense.
Yeah, and there's no way to progress when you're doing that. You're constantly firefighting, you're constantly on the defensive, and in a sense, I know some people have kind of viewed this as a tactic to essentially keep the LGBTQ community distracted, keep them working on fighting fires and stuff, and then we can't coordinate and start pushing for real changes because we are just trying to hold on to the things that we have. And as we'll almost certainly have covered in another episode by this point, recent statements from Liz Truss, who is ostensibly in charge of the Women and Equalities Committee at this point, has made people really question and really nervous about what the intention of this government is. And it's not being helped, and is you could quite easily view it as in part prompted by potentially political power wanting to pander to this hate movement, essentially. And that's not good, I feel.
No, I mean, we've seen obviously in the last few years the rise of right-wing populism. Right-wing populism is extremely hostile, obviously, to trans rights and to trans people. And the most extreme manifestation of that at the moment is in Hungary, where Viktor Orban, who is now set up an outright far-right dictatorship, which is an anti-Semitic, racist dictatorship. And one of the first things he's used with emergency powers granted to him during in the early phases of the pandemic is to abolish trans rights of any description. And you can see in the United States, Donald Trump, obviously, in terms of most notably banning trans people from serving in the army. And you can see here, before the election, it was mooted that the Tories had done polling on trans rights and trans issues in certain seats because they thought they could fight a culture war. And that's how they see this. They see this as a culture war, the rights and freedoms of minorities and the struggle for equality. Their view was will for, in the same way in the late 80s, Patricia Hewitt, who was then working for Neil Kinnock, the Labour leader, as his press spokesperson, wrote a note saying that gay rights issue was hurting Labour amongst older people. And of course, at the time, if you look at the British Social Attitude Survey, attitudes towards homosexuality in Britain were catastrophic. They were very bad. Of course, it was the right thing to do for Labour to stand on the side of gay people, and history has vindicated that. But again, they like to think that most people, that we've had a very one-sided war against trans people and trans rights, that for most people, trans rights is not something people have been educated about, and therefore they think they can weaponize this issue to force to inflict damage on their opponents, quite literally using trans people, again, a minority we know with huge levels of mental distress, who suffer huge discrimination in the workplace, in the streets, in education and so on, to use them as pawns in a political struggle against their opponents. It's really disgusting. And I think that's at the root of what we're seeing from government.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's sort of culture war stuff, isn't it? And it's not much fun, but there we go. So, kind of returning to the media, and this may be a question that you will, not be able to comment on too much. Essentially, obviously, you yourself have voiced support for trans and non-binary people many, many times. So how is it working for The Guardian, where not an insignificant number of colleagues seem to disagree?
So I do have to be careful in terms of what I say. I've just got to be brutally honest about that. Okay, what I would say is that there is a struggle going on within progressive circles generally. I'm tiptoeing a bit here, I know, in this country, between those who are supportive of trans people and trans rights and those who are not. And that struggle is very, very difficult and hard. And again, not again as a cis person trying to claim victimhood here, but objectively it's extremely hard because there are few people within progressive circles, in many progressive circles in British society, in powerful positions who get that and are supportive of that. Now, within The Guardian, there are hundreds of people who support trans people and trans rights and are very passionate about standing with them. And my own view is that history will vindicate those of us who stood and fought for trans people and for trans rights, just as history vindicates those who fought for cisgendered, gay and bisexual people. That is hard and difficult now, and often comes with, as I've said, a relentless attempt by the anti-trans lobby to menace the jobs and positions of people who support trans people and trans rights. But they're going to lose and we're going to win. And I really hope that The Guardian, which has provided so much of a platform to so many minorities who've been oppressed over the years, can understand that and will. I want trans people to be able to, I want us to end up in a position where trans people can see The Guardian as their ally and supporter. And I understand the hurt and distress that currently exists, but there are so many at The Guardian who often you maybe haven't heard their voice. I know you've probably seen evidence of people at The Guardian who do support trans rights and trans people.
Indeed,
and
once or twice.
We're not going away, and we're only going to grow in number, and we are going to win this battle. It's just absolutely inevitable. And actually, the viciousness of our opponents is based in large part on that insecurity that they know they're going to lose. They can see that, and they constantly go on about the woke youth. And the reason they're going on about the woke youth is they know that those younger people are eventually going to run society, and they're going to bring with it, values including support trans people and trans rights. So they know they're going to lose. So I know there are not enough of us with a platform who support trans people and trans rights in this country, and it's not always easy to do because of the huge pressure involved from those who aren't supportive of trans rights and trans people, that we're not going to stop speaking out at any cost. It's just not going to happen. So I hope you'll see more and more people within The Guardian who will be speaking out and being supportive. And, there are LGBTQ people at The Guardian are very passionately fighting that battle, and we're going to keep fighting it. And I hope we can end up in the position that we all want in this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you understand why we had to ask that. But yeah, that was fantastic. And honestly, I can't think of a better sentiment upon which to leave the interview.
And well, just finally on that, first, it's a huge honour to be on. And, your podcast does incredible, fantastic stuff. It's such a difficult time. And this is a time when it's particularly difficult for LGBTQ people, not least younger people who are trapped with homophobic or transphobic parents. And we need to think about them and show support and solidarity and use online networks to do that. But I just want to say to all trans people listening, that solidarity, support. It's been a terrible few years in terms of the media battering, but you're going to win. We're going to build a society where trans people can be accepted and where bigotry towards trans people is defeated. And that is going to happen. And I know there are many dark moments when it feels that that's not going to happen, but it will happen. And just to show support and solidarity. And thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much. So just while we're here, where can people find you online or in print?
Well, you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I'm Owen Jones 84. I'm not doing that for a while. People are you doing that to show you're young? And then I'm not young anymore, so that's lost that advantage. But it's because the Owen Jones is taken. And in The Guardian, they can see me in The Guardian as well.
Of course. All right. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.
Great. Well, great to see you in solidarity. Speak to you soon.
So, first thing I want to say is, if you're listening, massive thanks to Owen Jones for even, giving us the time of day, essentially. But that was a really good conversation. There were definitely parts of that where I was like, okay, I was expecting that. And there was some stuff that he said that surprised me slightly, I think. I was definitely, from what he was talking about at the start, about his own experience and about the way you internalise so much stuff, and it's very difficult to then kind of break out of that and fight against it. Specifically wrote down, when I was doing notes for this, his use of the phrase extreme and obsessive when describing the anti-facts crowd. I've decided to call them anti-facts rather than anti-trans because there seems to be a kind of magnetism thing whereby if you're anti-trans, you're also anti-LGB generally and anti-mask and anti-vaccine and blah, blah, blah. So just the anti-facts crowd, as opposed to people in the reality-based community, have kind of noticed that for a while. And it's good to see somebody of such prominence agree. But as you mentioned before the interview, Michelle, that has come at a cost. To Owen Jones himself.
Yeah, they really, the people that hate us, they probably hate Owen Jones slightly more in a very different way, because Owen Jones is a cis man who is also a gay man, so homophobia comes into play when they go at him. And also some of the ghastly stuff that they've done, like some of the things that he mentioned, it's just, we've never had stuff like that bad. We've had bad stuff. We've had death threats and all sorts, but nothing that goes right into the personal feelings of us.
Yeah, exactly.
The stuff that... Owen has definitely suffered because of his views on trans issues, but he does it anyway and doesn't shut up. And this guy has been beaten up and stuff, by people who don't like him. He is very much measures up to the kind of person I think who deserves a column in a national newspaper, whereas there are many others out there who don't, who will let their views and their words be managed and controlled by financial concerns or other things, whereas Owen Jones clearly doesn't give a fuck. If something's right, he's going to say it. And he comes from that at a place from empathy, which makes him unique. I know that he's going to hate the idea of me blowing so much smoke up his ass, but I'm not lying. I'm not saying this just because he gave us the time of day. It's true. It would have been true if he said he didn't have the time for us.
Indeed. No, I would agree, and I did appreciate what he said about The Guardian, and I had to ask him about that. It's kind of like, he comes across as a very nice guy. He does, and I have read a couple of his books, and I do read his columns, and so I kind of don't want to push this question, because it seems like slightly hostile in some element from us. But I kind of had to ask because, obviously, as we ourselves have reported on this very podcastly news outlet, that there have been one or two problems in The Guardian's stance on trans people. And it was interesting to hear him pick up as well on the idea of it kind of being a generational divide in terms of feminism and older people. And I think to a large extent that's true, but then there is one friend of mine who was a little bit younger than me, and we met when I first moved to Manchester and came out and transitioned and stuff, and very, very close friends, and we would sit and talk about feminism and literature and all sorts of other nonsensy things, and Rush. She was a big fan of Rush. And she actually dated a trans woman and is now now drinking the turfy anti-facts Kool-Aid, and it's like,
Wow.
I know, and I am astonished as to how that happened, really. That's not to completely undermine and attempt to say, I have one single proof that you are wrong, and therefore you're wrong. It's just, it's obviously a little bit more complicated than that.
I think the thing that happens in the trans community, which I've noticed and tried to speak out on, is that there is a habit that we have where we see a publication publishing something transphobic and then we assume the whole organisation is trash, especially around BBC News, when people will say the BBC is trash, but BBC News is one small part of it, whereas in many others parts of the BBC, it is the exact opposite. And I think this applies to The Guardian as well, because there are many parts of The Guardian and many people inside The Guardian, people I've talked to, usually on their way out of the organisation, but people I've talked to have been like, no, there are people there trying to do the right thing for trans people. It's just hitting walls and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And as Owen said, and I'm not trying to say that that isn't there, but obviously we kind of had to have those conversations. And again, I'm very thankful and grateful to Owen Jones for sitting down and having that conversation with us so honestly and eruditely and empathically, really, because that's kind of what you take away from that, is that, again, it's people trying to do the right thing, not because the right thing is some arbitrary concept, but the right thing is to look after each other and be nice. And yeah, stop just constantly being horrible and attacking each other, because that doesn't really achieve anything. Which, if I recall correctly, is a theme that's touched on in the next of our jolly little interviews. So, Michelle, do you want to...
when doing these Cis Ally specials, and we've got 2 more interviews next week coming up, there was a bit of a pattern where I got on really well with some people, and so the interview went on probably a little longer that would have been professional. But honestly, chatting with Josie Long was so much fun, because like I've been admiring her work from afar. Yeah, just sitting down and chatting, within like 5 minutes, we were having a laugh. Like usually there's a bit of a lead in, but with Josie Long, she was very, very relaxed and very chill and very, very easy to talk to. I mean, we got on like a house on fire. There was so much stuff that got cut from this because it was just us going on a tangent about stuff that just to entertain ourselves. But with great pleasure, let me play the tape on my chat with Josie Long. Hello, Josie Long. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. So I have seen you do stand-up before in the flesh, in the back of a room, but this is in the dark before times, before I came out.
Oh, I thought you meant before the pandemic. I was like, yeah, things were so different then.
Oh, this is way, way before the pandemic. This is before a Olympics, and I can't even remember which one. There was an Olympics, and then I came out.
Cool.
I don't know when, but yeah, I saw you before that, and now it's like you've come back to see the final form of Michelle. So I'm very excited about this.
Oh, that's nice.
So essentially, when did you first become aware of transgender issues?
Well, it's interesting because when I was a teenager, there was a girl who was trans at college. So my friends went to college, I was in sixth form, and we would all hang out. And in fact, there were 2 trans girls at that college. And I knew them both, and I knew them both sort of as they transitioned as kind of 17, 18-year-olds. And it was not a thing for any of us. Do you know what I mean? We all just knew that that's who they were and what they were doing. It just didn't seem an issue. I don't remember any conversations around it being anything other than like, oh, that's what they're doing. Oh, I suppose that makes sense, blah, blah, blah. So that was like my first introduction to knowing trans people. My stepsister is trans. So I was there with her transition. It was a really interesting thing because when she came out, it was like everything made sense, you know? And you go, oh, that's why there was a part of you I didn't connect with or understand before, because you weren't fully you at that point. And I have another friend who I've known him since before he transitioned, and the same thing happened. Like when he started transitioning, everything made sense as to who he was.
I've got to ask, where did you grow up? Because it sounds like it's breeding trans people at an alarming rate.
Well, one of them I met in Scotland as well, but it was Orpington. And also, to be fair, I think I've been very lucky insofar as I've just known trans people since I was a teenager. Like there was a trans comedian who was in our, I used to go to a comedy workshop when I was about 15. Her name's Shelley Cooper. It was just all very normal. So I think I've been very lucky because it's just been a part of my life to have it be a normal thing, which it is. So for a long time, my experience of it were knowing trans people and it just being a part of normal life. only recently, the last few years, since kind of turfism has become this thing online, this fucking virus, has it sort of been so clear how much shit there is, basically. So I suppose I lived in quite a naive place where it was like, I know people and I'm not giving them shit, so here we go. And now I'm like aware of the particularly mendacious circumstances that have been like stoked in the past few years in particular. And I think it's obviously come with like wider, greater acceptance and understanding and prominence. There's like this mad backlash. Does that make sense? So that's basically my background, is just I know some trans people. There we go.
I mean, it does, but it also makes you sound kind of like a time travel. Like you grew up in 2080 where being trans is boring. Then you came back to it and were like, what the fuck is going on here? 2017 is awful.
But it wasn't boring. It was just there. Do you know what I mean? That's the weird thing, is that I'm like, I'm sure that trans people were all there in the 90s. Like, I'm really like weirded out by people trying to pretend that it's like new, when even like to my mind, as a teenager in like 1998, there were 2 trans women at my college. It was they were there.
Yeah, I was at school in the 90s. I was there.
Yeah.
I couldn't come. I didn't really know what being trans was, or that it was possible, but like I was there being trans.
Well, also, I think we were in this weird little bubble where we were in this little subculture of people who loved this band Placebo. Do you know the band Placebo?
Of course, yes.
The band Placebo had all this kind of, and I think it was quite superficial and quite affected, but it had lots of like, we're all bisexual and we sort of enjoy playing with different gender norms and like experimenting. And so we really, my little group of pals was sort of like, yeah, this is very good and normal to be like not worrying about whether or not you're fitting in a certain box or something.
For the 20-year-olds listening, Placebo was like the favourite band of every closeted trans woman in the 90s and early noughties.
Because the lead singer, Brian Molko, was very much up for like, I don't know, just acknowledging that people aren't, I don't know, that life is more interesting and complicated than things have been told. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I kind of feel jealous because I grew up in Yorkshire where in Section 28 where there was like nothing around.
No, but this is where I think I was in this little bubble. I think I'm remembering my feelings towards friends of mine. I'm certain they got shit all the time in Orpington. Orpington was the sort of place where everyone got shit, and you know, like, I'm not saying it was some paradise or anything like that. I'm just saying that I knew those people and it was very just much part of our normal life to be pals.
So when it comes to the comedy scene, we've had Jordan Gray on. I've interviewed Bethany Black many years ago when I was at Pink News. There are trans people in the comedy circuit. Yeah. You may not be the right person to ask about this, but there
have been for 20 years, seriously. Like, I remember, so Shelley Cooper, who we went on the same course in like 1997, 98. Yeah, there's been trans people on the circuit for probably for like 40 years since before I've got there as well, you know.
When it comes to audiences, like comedy audiences over the last, say, 5 years, do you think that they are more primed for like transgender comedians now than they were? Like, I mean, obviously you're a cisgender comedian. You can only speak to your experience, but on the whole, do you think comedy audiences have become more open-minded in general, or do you think they're still very much...
I do, but it's with the caveat that I don't play very kind of macho atmospheres. I don't play clubs anymore, although I do think clubs have softened. I know that 20 years ago, when I did ever do the odd open spot at like Jongleurs, which was this kind of really macho comedy chain that was very...
Basket of chicken, 5 comedians, all of them talking about football and how women don't understand it.
And slagging off and picking on the front row of the crowd, and, you know, Hindu screaming in the background. I definitely feel that the circuit has somewhat softened, and that people are now allowed to sort of go and engage, and there is more of a culture of engaging with what you're watching and not just treating it like wallpaper to your night out. And I would obviously say that, like, I do tours where I love my crowd, and I like to think my crowd is very warm-hearted and not judgmental and not prejudicial, and like just a nice crowd. But even that having been said, yeah, I just think the circuit is full stop better and more diverse than ever. It is. It's just a nicer place to be because it isn't just the same three people coming on stage and slagging off their wife. It's better than that.
I had a little bit of a comedy career. I got a few paid gigs, but to build up to like basically having 3-4 gigs a week that throw you 20 quid or whatever, that's where I was. I had to sit through 3 hours of like white guys talking about that time their friend at uni shit themselves, and I just gave up. I was like, I can't do this. It's not worth it for me.
I think there is a bit of that. But I think what's exciting is if you can hang in long enough that you can carve out your own space, then it becomes your gaff that you're bringing people around to. And then, like, what for me, so the first few years of doing comedy, before I started doing hour-long shows, I would have quite a hard time in a lot of places. And partly it was because I'd go somewhere and I'd think, God, I don't want to be in this audience. Why would I expect them to like me when I wouldn't want to be here? It's obviously not a match, you know? And what I found since touring my own show is if you can find your crowd comes to you. And everyone wants to laugh and everyone wants to find the people they identify with. And for me, like, actually the last sort of 5-10 years has shown that the more comedians there are, because there's more comedians than ever before, the more people really get to pick and choose exactly who they want to see. So in actual fact, if I was maybe picking up some audience that actually were like, well, I guess I want to see a woman, this will do. And now they're like, no, you're not a woman with my exact interests. I'm going to find them, you know. And so, yeah, I think it's a better place. There are some very sort of bleak and dark corners of it as well. Like, it's just a bigger place with so many more different things going on. And so, you know, in comedy, you also have people who think they're so fucking edgy because they're being cruel to people.
Oh, God, yeah.
And then also, I mean, if I'm going to be downbeat, you can look on something like Netflix and you can scroll through the comedy specials and 90% of them are a 50-year-old rich American man deciding who they can slag off today. And you're like, oh, God, I don't want this.
It's like half of all the Netflix comedy specials are called Triggered now.
It's so, you just want to go, guys, I know you think this is an exciting original idea, but unfortunately, it is not. It is really not. Oh. But I'm always an optimist in terms of the wellspring that is new people coming to making art. And the best thing about comedy is it's actually not got that many barriers to writing and performance compared to some other art forms. It's not like Formula One where you have to have an expensive car. Not that I think Formula One is an art form. Fuck that shit. But you know what I mean.
The best stuff I did was when I would talk about stuff that has happened to me, and could only have happened to me.
I think that is the best stuff. I think the more individual you are in terms of, the more honest you are about truthfully sharing your experience, the more people will connect with it because it's real and it doesn't have to be identical to their experience for them to sort of appreciate that and remind them of things and touch them and stuff. Yeah, completely.
So if anyone's listening who wanted to get into comedy, you would say, do it now, basically.
Yeah, always. And do it because it doesn't have to become a job. It doesn't have to become a source of fame and fortune. It can just be a really amazing, fun thing that you do to give yourself. Like there's a full range of outcomes for it. And if you want to do it, it's worth doing it.
I'll say I did have fun in the 5 to 20 that they would let me do. I always did have fun.
But now you've got your own outlet, you see. Everyone finds a way to sort of tailor what they want to make to a good creative outlet, if they keep trying, I think.
Yeah, I got to say I do like doing this more. Just I think I had to do it in my bedroom.
But also this is why, I think, so this is probably why you didn't keep doing stand-up, because actually you want to find the thing that really suits you. If you loved stand-up, you would have wanted to keep it up. The fact that you didn't is kind of something to listen to.
That's true. I loved being up there. I hated everything else. Like everything else. Like I was never really pro standard, but I started getting paid gigs. And I think if I really loved it enough, I would have worked it in, maybe have carved out an audience like you said, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's always a 1 in a million shot with this kind of thing. But, you know, I think I would have definitely... Yeah, I think you're right. Wow, this is becoming a lot more soul-searching than I was going for. I was trying to angle it towards, so if trans people want to be funny...
Let me say this so loud and clear. Anyone listening, any trans person listening who wants to do comedy, do it. Do it because, like, as you say, the more different voices we have, the better the comedy. And the more people bring their experiences to culture, the better culture is, the richer we all are for it. And it's good. It's interesting and funny. Like, good. Do it. Yeah. And comedy is welcoming. And if it isn't, there's enough people who are like, who is this person being unwelcoming? Fuck them.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. I did go and support a friend who did an open mic, and there was one of those guys who was very much like, I'm going to moan about the woke people. And his jokes were just met with groans. And I was like, wow, the scene has changed. The scene has changed. That person would get a standing applause. He'd be called the next Bill Hicks.
But there are places where that person will find success. And
I really hope not.
It doesn't fill me with glee and joy. But the fact is exactly as you're saying. The mainstream is people going, really? This isn't edgy. It's boring. And it makes us all feel like shit. This isn't fun. You know?
Yeah.
It's fun to come and talk about your life and what you're interested in and what you're excited about. It's not fun to be like, I'm going to say the same lazy, mean bullshit.
Yeah. So going back to how you were introduced to transgender issues just by knowing a few of us growing up, that does bring a context to what's been happening to you of late, where you have been speaking out about trans issues and then suddenly you will get piled on by every bigot from here to wherever. And in some ways, like, you get more crap than we do. Like, we get some crap, but we're on like turf blockers and stuff, and we've got like all these things set up so half of them can't see us.
Good.
You're a public figure, so if you say a thing, you'll get like 100 people trying to just like, stop the cool person saying this thing.
Yes, it's weird.
I saw your face earlier, and I just want to say that, like, what the trans as an entity gets less crap than you do. When I got a thing published in the Eye like last week, I got all the shit.
Yeah, exactly. It's a weird thing. Like, it just shows, isn't it, that anyone trying to do anything that has any platform, they go for relentlessly. I mean, it's really, I fucking hate it. I hate them. I think it is so incredibly cynical, fake, nothing to do with the reality of people's lives, nothing to do with the reality of what it means to be trans, or what trans people need, or women need, full stop, all women. Like, the fact that they pretend that it's about feminism is like, it boggles me. But I'm not getting any shit for being a cis woman ever. I'm not getting prejudiced against for being cis. Like, it's a luxury that I'm in this position that I can say something supportive. And so even though it is, they have these really intense, well, we all know that they have very intense, maddening tactics where they really, really like pretend to be concerned, and like then they like go into, it's like a cult. It's like the worst parts of the internet. You know, you don't even know who most of these people are. Are they even like genuine, or is it just people paying people to do it? Like, who knows where all this deluge comes from? And it makes me, I think it's so bad and so sad, and it is very frustrating and weird, but at the same time I feel really lucky that I'm like, well, on a day-to-day level, I'm just living my life out there with all the privilege of being a cis woman, not having to think about shit. Like, it's the fucking least I can do to just state reality and state my commitment to not being a cunt. Like, it's not, I just don't, the weird thing that I think, especially with certain ringleaders of online harassment towards trans people, is their end game is never going to be achieved, because they're never going to convince me that the people I know and love aren't the people I know and love. And they're never going to convince me that the legitimate lived experiences of trans people aren't what they are. Like, it's scare stories, it's nonsense. And the only reason it takes hold in people is because I think, you know, you have these like older other cis women who are, they don't know any trans people, or they don't realise they know any trans people, and they get sold this thing that frightens them. Or people, you know, like certain wealthy ex-TV writers who maybe don't have enough time on their hands and like the idea of finding a cause that's so, you know, I think because it's a lie, it's very clear and pure, isn't it? Because it's a lie. It's not, you know, pure is the wrong word. It's a, to them, they can just follow it doggedly.
It simplifies the world. There's baddies there, we're the goodies, kill 'em.
Exactly. And so, like, I think all of this kind of scaremongering that has taken its little foothold is just so disconnected from my reality. It doesn't matter what they can be as rude as they want. it doesn't change the truth of the people that I know and love and the people that I meet and am aware of and watch the culture of. Like,
well, you're not the prime target. I mean, a few weeks back, we had a couple of former gender critical. I'm doing the quotation marks, listeners. I'm not letting them off. Trans people who got sucked in because they were both in a very, very poor way, a really bad way. They have a history of being in actual cults in the States and like had a whole bunch of traumas going on. And then they just swooped in with the love bombing after they both came out with something remotely turfy. And that's the story that keeps coming out from these communities. Like, there was a piece in Pink News recently.
Yeah, so
there's going to be more. I can't say too much, but there's more on the way. Like, there's something's going on in turfdom right now where loads of people are jumping ship and talking to every journalist they could. It's just so weird. Like, me and Vic Parsons of Pink News talk a fair bit, and I just turned around to them and was like, how do we both get former TERFs in the same week? Something's going on here. So if it makes you feel any better, it looks like even they're starting to realise that they're all full of shit.
Well, also because it isn't a genuinely loving or meaningful place, is it? Like, it's not real. It's not based in genuine activism towards making people's lives easier. It's based in creating straw men and demonising people at random on the internet and taking someone out of context and then making up the sort of worst thing that you speculatively say they could choose to do, and then hounding everyone until everyone denounces this nonsense falsehood that you've made. So, like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that people are unfulfilled by it because it's not helping anyone. It's just scaring people and upsetting people and hurting people.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, like, I think the thing with TERFism is that, like, much as it is upsetting and annoying to become their target, I'm not the person that they're victimizing, and it's like, it's just not on what they're doing. It's not fucking on, mate. It's not on.
No, but you did mention a certain comedy writer, and it feels like I've got to ask, what the hell do you think happened to him? Like, 5 years ago he was tweeting about, you know, the war in Iraq and occasionally a joke, and then like 3 years ago, like, just like overnight he was just like, I'm going to spend 12 hours a day just retweeting random trans people's faces and calling them beard all day.
Yeah.
That's my life now. What the fuck happened to him?
Yeah, I'm going to defend all lesbians, apart from the lesbians that ask me to stop harassing them. Oh, God almighty.
Yeah, he's been on Grace Petrie, who's in this episode as well, which is just fucking mind-blowing.
Well,
it's like...
Me and Grace, we've toured together a lot. We're really good friends, and we talk about it a lot because it's just so bizarre for her, as somebody who gets misgendered all the time in toilets, to have people telling her about the truth of what it means to be misgendered. It is so stupid and wrong and tedious, you know, telling her off. And like the obsession that people have of trying to make people declare who they would and wouldn't sleep with. It's all of it is so reductive and not to do with how people actually live their lives and what it actually means to be attracted to people and what it actually means to like live in this world. Like, and again, so I would say that largely I identify as a straight woman. I'm a cis straight woman. I couldn't be more of a vanilla person, but even I am like, well, I'm sure like if I met the right person who wasn't a man, maybe we would fall in love. And I'm straight and I can understand that. Like the idea that people wouldn't ever just go, like they wouldn't just fall in love with a person that they met is fucking insane to me. Anyway, sorry, I feel like I'm too reductive when I talk about these things. But yeah, me and Grace talk about it a lot. It's bizarre that this man has decided whatever he chooses to do is fine, and that other people are bullies and not him, and that because 3 or 4 big people in the TERF movement say he's good, whatever he does is good. But it's been very weird because I watched a couple of interviews with him on YouTube last week, partly because lockdown, he's like, just keeps about once a week just mentioning me. And I'm like, so me personally, I think he's seen that I've liked tweets making jokes about him or something, or he's annoyed that I've used the word TERF, but I don't even really use it online because I just think it's not worth this nonsense that they bring to it. Like I might as well just not and say transphobe, like that's the truth, who cares? Like, so with him, I watched a couple of interviews with him last week, one of which where he named me as his enemy, and I was like, are you 11? Like, who has enemies? What are you? A
He
medieval
did.
knight?
Was that on Trigonometry?
Yeah, I watched that, which was a really weird watch for me.
I fucking hate that podcast so much. I don't just because they've got triggered in the name, and I'm just like,
so sad.
it's so sad.
But I watched him do an interview with that Posey Parker, who's a nonsense person who gets funding from the extreme people who are absolutely not feminists, shall we say.
Yeah.
I watched an interview with him on there as well. And with both of them, it was so interesting to watch it as an outsider and to just examine their own views of themselves and the world and how much they see themselves as so reasonable, but the things they're saying are so kind of false and egregious, and how I don't know, I watched it and was just sort of thinking, God, there's all these new cultural things that they're creating that are so toxic and they're selling them as so reasonable. And it was really depressing. So what I think happened to him is that something that he said, like in one of them, he just gave his origin story where he basically somebody called him out for transphobia in a show he wrote. And instead of examining that and sitting with the uncomfortable feelings, he decided that he would find some people who would back him up and tell him he was right. And he found them. And then he just got deeper and deeper and deeper. And then everyone trying desperately to like get him to stop convinced him that he was right even more and more and more. And he's just gone in a rocket up to the moon.
I think it's a new kind of radicalization in a way, like, because you sort of see, like, let's say you've got a little brother, he grows up a bit, then suddenly he shows up with a skinhead. You're like, oh, well, I know what's happened.
This is bad.
That's an alt-right, or what they used to call a white supremacist person now. I know what that is. This is like the same kind of thing, only now it's a new form of hate where you just sit on Twitter and moan about 0.6% of the population all day. It's very, very strange, but I think it's the same mechanism in that something has gone wrong in his life and he's trying to find meaning. But this is all speculation. I can't diagnose anyone.
I think it's interesting. I think when people discover politics, it can feel like a calling to them. And I think showbiz in general can attract people who have a bit of a messiah complex. And so maybe those two things together can be pretty toxic if they're unchecked. I think as well, it is a new kind of radicalization. My own experience of it is when I was a young woman, like maybe 22, 23, I read some like what is known as like swarthy feminism. So like feminism about abolishing sex work and about, I used to read like columns by Julie Bindel when I read I remember sort of meeting feminists who were sort of all about that kind of thing. And the way at that time it connected with me was on such a really, really painful emotional level. I used to think about women being exploited and harmed, and it used to make me so overwhelmed and upset and angry that my connection to it was very, very intense. I was like, no, like it's not about consent, it's about blah, blah, blah. And I've obviously come out of the other side of that with a completely different viewpoint. And what was the big turning point for it was just realizing that none of it was actually from the perspective of sex workers, really. None of it was actually listening to what sex workers wanted or treating sex workers as they were comrades. It was treating them as if they were a threat to relationships with men, or like they were people to be rescued or something. You know, it wasn't treating people with the agency that they deserve, and it was charity, not solidarity in that respect, you know, like. And so basically, like, when I did sort of have a kind of awakening about that a few years later, where I was like, oh, like all of this feminism is not like, it's attacking women at its core in a way, like it's not listening to sex workers, it's not appreciating it. And I think it's a similar sort of thing, isn't it? It's people pretending that trans women aren't their comrades, or like people pretending that like trans people aren't comrades to other people in like the LGBTQIA community, I think. And it's people not, I don't know, like being emotionally provoked and exploited in order to harm people, as opposed to just listening and like joining up with people.
Yeah, it's come up a couple of times. What would I be doing if like all that hate wasn't there?
Oh, wow.
And two things. One, I would be far more involved in like feminist groups.
Wow.
Probably, I'd like to think campaigning for domestic abuse refuges and stuff like that, because that's something I know some people that work in it. It's something that really gets me fired up.
Yep.
But then I'm stuck at home basically sort of tracking government policy on trans people all the time. The other thing I'd be doing is that this podcast wouldn't exist, and in its place it would be a podcast about how much I love bad movies based on video games.
But it reminds me of a friend of mine was talking about how racism is designed to waste your time and distract you and to kind of knock you off your kilter, so that instead of making your art that you want to make, you have to then deal with their bullshit. You have to then deal with the things that they do, that they've put on you or accused you of or anything like that. And I think in a similar way, what this ends up doing to people is not letting trans people just live their own happy lives, constantly making them have to defend and mitigate and shit like that, and creating these kind of false fears. Like you say, you're feeling like you can't get involved in this thing that you want to help out in because they've created this hysteria around something that is not the case. And it's like, it's so depressing. And also, when I think about like the sexism I've suffered as a cis woman, it's all the same shit. It's like, you know, since I started doing comedy, I got abuse online because I was a young woman daring to do comedy. Since I started to talk about politics, I got abuse online because I was a woman daring to talk about politics. Like, it's the same fucking shit. And if there wasn't these people trying to divide us, we would all better be able to fight the same system, you know?
And I'd be able to do a 2-hour rant about why the Super Mario Bros. Movie is a forgotten classic. I think the world is missing out.
But what I want to say to you is please do this and please do your other podcast, because how dare they deprive the world of that cute show? Like, you should be allowed to live your cute life ranting about terrible films. And I want to give you that permission, because fuck that shit. Like, yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's brutal. And I think it's, you know, so many people have their lives limited by these kinds of like prejudicial hate campaigns. And the idea that feminism would be repurposed in order to do it more to like trans people who are already marginalized is fucking sickening. It's the opposite of what feminism should be doing. And that's, I think, you know, for me, like, understanding what solidarity means was such a big learning curve in my feminism when I had been sort of flirting or had influenced by people who were a bit like swervy, and going like, oh, I didn't realize that I was being manipulated emotionally to that extent, and that I was just wrong. That's not right. And I think it's weird as well, because if somebody gets caught up in something and they don't realise how false or intense it is, I think it is hard to step out of that. But like you say, lots of people are doing that now, so hopefully more people will.
It's an explanation, not an excuse, because there's been a few times where I probably could have gone that way, and maybe if the circumstances were different, I probably would have, but I didn't. Lots of people didn't. I guess there was a choice made somewhere, but also, you know, it's toxic and attractive, and it simplifies the world. And when the world has been very, very complicated to you at the very least, and then they come in and be like, we love the shit out of you, and then you're in.
Yeah, and all you have to do is just repeat the lines we give you over and over again in public so that we can use. I feel for, there's a couple of women that like, he obviously just uses as like his shield. He goes, well, I know them and they agree with me.
Some of them deserve pity. Some of them really don't.
I think the best thing people listening to this can do is, if they're trans people listening to this, they can enjoy the fuck out of their life and try their hardest to just remember how pathetic and fringe the people who are so loud online are. And I remember actually, so even when I was like much more inclined to think of like feminism as being like shutting down all the strip clubs and stuff like that, I was reading Germaine Greer, The Whole Woman, and there was a bit in it that was so fucking transphobic out of nowhere that I remember writing in the margin like, what the fuck, like where the fuck has this come from? And that's what it just felt like, this bizarre diversion. And I think it's like, it's been jumped on by people who want to split up solidarity between like LGBTQ, you know, between like an alliance that was already there. And it's been jumped on by people on the evangelical far right. And it's been jumped on by people on all kinds of like dodgy political places, because they know that they can like fuck with people. Like, this is a bit tinfoil hat, but like the thing that really made me think, what the fuck is this movement, was they all seem to be focusing on attacking the Labour Party a few years ago, not the Conservative Party, not anything. It was about attacking and diminishing the Labour Party. And that for me felt so odd. I was like, so they're trying to split up people that otherwise would quite naturally be looking out for each other. There was something about it. I mean, I don't know. I don't know, but, the evidence is there. I know it sounds a bit conspiracist, but there was something about it that made me think the motivations for this are nowhere near what they say they are.
You raise a good point, because a few years ago, it was the Conservative front bench, as much as I despise them and they make me feel a bit sick, they were kind of pushing for...
GRA reform.
Yeah, they were kind of pushing for it, at the very least on the front bench. Maria Miller in the party was doing it, Nicky Morgan a bit, but quite slow. Penny Mordaunt turned out huge ally.
But genuinely, I remember it at the time, and that all the focus was Labour losing women.
Yeah, but they were on the Labour Party. He weren't even in power.
And there were lots and lots of. There was a person who pretended to be a non-binary trans person who ran for a women's position in Labour, and rightfully they basically were like, "We know you're pretending this. Why are you doing this?" And he was like, "Ah ha ha!" And they were like, "No, this is exactly the fake thing that you say is going to happen, and we're not letting this happen." But it was in the Labour Party. Somebody did that as a cynical stunt. There was something else that was in the Labour Party. So basically, it was all only focusing on that. And it did make me think, this is not even effective campaigning, let alone sincere. Yeah. I mean, who knows? That's the other thing, isn't it? They have crowdfunders. They're paid by anonymous people. Who knows?
So before I do the whole thing where I ask you where people can find you online, what your new show is about, all that stuff, I just want to say there was a line from the one DVD of yours that I owned and still own somewhere, but I haven't looked at my DVDs in a very long time because we live in the future.
Who has a DVD player in this life? Yeah.
Watching movies off bits of plastic? What is this? But I remember there was always one line in it that stuck with me, and I'm not going to say it inspired me to come out, because I don't think any one line can, but you said something along the lines of, at the end of your life, when you die, you don't get a trophy saying, "Well done, you didn't enjoy any of it."
Yeah.
And I don't even remember what the lead-in to that was as a punchline, but I remember that because I was so fucking miserable, because it was the dark before times. Long before COVID. This is the dark before times of 2010, which were a fucking paradise compared to now in a lot of ways. But anyway.
Oh, don't even get me started.
I was so optimistic about the government at that point. Just like, oh, the Lib Dems are in. They'll stop the Tories from being awful. Oh, no, wait.
I'm so sorry.
How naive could you be?
I was like, in 2009, I was like, no, vote Labour, please. 2009, please, God, please. Once they get in, they'll never come out. And then in 2010, I was like, oh God. But then in 2015, I was like, we'll get them out. And now I'm like, fuck everyone. Fuck everyone. They're all cynics. They're all liars. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. You don't get, it was basically about how I don't like cynicism, and how, you don't get a prize at the end of life saying, well done, you didn't enjoy any of it. And it's worth it to be sincere and to try. It is that whole show is called Trying is Good, and I believe it. It's about letting yourself be an eccentric who loves what they do, and letting yourself pursue things that not everyone would like, and letting yourself be a fan of things or be a kook or whatever. And I really believe that. And again, it comes down to sort of, you being this being like this little vulnerable flower that can blossom and that has people trying to fucking crush it. And you just can't let them crush you.
I think that's a good point to wrap this thing up. I couldn't have wrapped it up better. Nicely done. Nicely done. You've done this before.
Well, listen, please follow me on Twitter at Josie Long. I see, and I feel like a coward, because then I see people what's her name? Is her name Nicola Coughlan? She's amazing. She's
Oh yeah, Dairy Girls.
Yeah. And she's so cool. She'll literally be like, fuck TERFs, I hate you all. And I'll be like, but I'm like, well, I won't say the T word, because then they'll just go on at me. I might as well just say what I mean. And so I feel like, compared to her, I'm a wimp. No, and I'm on Instagram at Josie Long, and I'm on Twitch, twitch.tv/Josie_Long, and I do my show twice a week. My show is about pregnancy and childbirth and maternity, but I like to think that it is quite an inclusive show. So it's for people who don't want to do it themselves, people for whom it is not something that their bodies would do, people who have done it but have completely different experiences to me, people who I like the idea that I'm actually just saying, these are my personal experiences, please let me share them with you, and in particular if they're different to yours, come and enjoy it. So that's the aim of it. Hopefully it's successful in that way. But yeah, yeah, it's about climate change as well, which we can all enjoy.
So it just sounds like this lovely little show about a very, very deep emotional time in your life. Then suddenly, bang, apocalypse.
Yeah, it's true. That's it.
Right, that's it. I got to go watch it, and you'll be able to get the all the information of that on the link sheet as usual. Josie, huge pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
After
Thanks so
seeing
much.
your face on DVD cover in my flat for 10 years.
When I was little, when I was so young, was I ever so young? Well, it's been lovely to talk to you, and yeah, you've got to make your fun podcast as well. Not that this isn't fun, but you've got to make your podcast that's just for you and your joy.
All right, I guess I better find a co-host who hates them, so we've got a good love-hate thing going on.
Oh yeah, you need a good dynamic. Yeah.
I'll channel Josie Long. They could channel Maron.
Sure.
Yeah, that'll
Just
work.
cut down so they don't talk about their cats for 45 minutes every single week.
Josie, thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
God, I had so much fun talking to Josie. And the thing that really stood out for me was that she's the first person I've talked to when doing these interviews where she grew up with trans people. And so met the backlash against us with genuine surprise. Just like, what? But they're just people. They're just, boring people like everyone else. What the hell is this? And I was not expecting that.
But that's going to have happened to some people, statistically, as Josie and yourself, and as we have said several times. Trans people have existed for a long time. It's not a brand spanking new thing. And those people are out there. And so statistically, some of them are going to have known each other while they were growing up. I particularly love the fact that she invoked placebo. Because when she mentioned that in the interview, I absolutely punched the air. Because I still do listen to placebo. Because it was so formative for me when I was a late child and early teenager. I was like, wow, who's that? So yeah, that was extremely relatable. Love it. And yes, I did notice you slightly fishing for career advice, but I think I think that's all right.
Well, to be fair, I don't know if I'm going to go back to the stand-up comedy world, but it was just nice to talk with someone, she obviously has so much more experience of it than me, but it was just nice to just be like, so you had this thing? Yes. Oh my God, I hate it. Because I think that's one of the things that people seem to forget. I mean, very similar to what you were saying at the beginning, when it comes to the stand-up comedy world, there is so much stuff you have to do that isn't the comedy. In my case, it was lots of sitting for 3 hours listening to cis men talk about that time their mate at uni shit themselves in Amsterdam. And it's like, well, this is not worth the 5 minutes I'm going to get. Occasionally I'd see another person who's not the cis white man archetype of comedy, and we'd sit there and just look at just be like, you've seen these gags before too. But honest to God, I wasn't fishing for career advice, because the way I see it, I love doing this so much more than the stand-up thing. Like we said, like Josie said, I found my thing. And I think I'm going to try and make that crappy video game podcast a thing. I think I really want to do it because I do love crappy video game movies. Like Street Fighter the movie is genuinely one of my favourite films of all time, and I will die on that hill and I will fight anyone who has a problem with that. But I think that's going to happen because I think Josie Long is right. Even if things are really weird, you've got to find stuff to enjoy, and that's the centerpiece of her comedy. So if you really need cheering up or something, go find an hour of her stuff somewhere, or go on her Twitch and see some of the shows she's putting together. There's so much cynicism, really dark jokes with the basis of being a cynic, and Josie Long is not that. Josie Long has a very unique voice in comedy, which I think there should be more of, more unique voices. So yeah, do check out everything Josie Long has ever done. There will be details in the sheet thing that we make that's linked to in the description, and the same with Owen Jones. Go check out his books, go check out his social media, and get involved in some of the other fights as well. Get involved with the trans stuff, obviously, but also get involved in the fights he does for immigrants and the fights for all sorts of various causes that there is some overlap. A friend of mine keeps telling me over and over again, there is no war except the class war. So get involved in some of the stuff Owen Jones is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do just want to pick up on something that was actually common between the two interviews, which is that we did talk about people who, are working against progress, who will try and, well, as Josie said, they'll try and waste your time and distract you. And that's what so much of the anti-facts lot are trying to do. That's why there's so much harassment on social media. That's why there's all this nonsense being put about in the papers. It's to keep you busy and exhausted. And I think a main message from Josie Long is try not to be busy and exhausted all the time. Find things to enjoy. Find what you like in your life and do those things. And I know it's hard. It's really, really hard. It's actually been really, really hard for us just recording this episode and keeping a relatively light tone, given the greater context in the world and in the UK at the moment. But we can't spend our entire lives dwelling on things that might have been or things that could be better. We need to take enjoyment and solace and solidarity where we can find it. Enjoy the little things and work for change.
Do what needs to be done, but also take some fucking time off and play some video games.
Yeah!
Go look at some nature or do some star sign stuff if that is your thing. Turns out there's a lot of astronomy queers out there that listen to us, which I didn't see coming.
Gosh, I wonder how that could have happened.
Yeah, I mean, you are definitely breaking us into new markets.
How you doing, my fellow witches? What are we on? Oh, September 21st. Happy Mabon to you. Anyway, yes, carry on.
I mean, I don't know if there's not much more to carry on. I think we could start wrapping up the show. You could tell that we had a big break and we're just trying to feel out how to do this again, can't you? You could tell.
How does this work? Yeah, absolutely. Delighted to talk to you again, Michelle. Delighted that we are essentially back. We have social medias, of course. You can find us on the Twitter at @WhatTheTrans. You can find us on Facebook /WhatTheTrans. We also surprisingly have an Instagram, which is, what is that again?
I'm trying to get my head around it. I've been told by several people that it is the place to go for trans people right now, but I'm 35 years old, Ashleigh. I can't get my head around it.
I mean, so am I. Okay, so I know how to use Instagram because although I'm 35 years old, I do... Do you know what? I'm not going to say what I was going to say because that's really mean. No, I know how to use Instagram. I was asking what our Instagram handle is.
@WhatTheTrans is our Instagram.
Yeah! That's us.
That is probably going to be me trying to figure things out and then Ashleigh coming in and doing it like a pro, by the sounds of it.
All the filters and so many iterations
Wait,
of
they have filters
pink.
on Instagram?
That's why everybody likes it, because it makes you look pretty. Anyway, onward to the endward of the show.
Yeah, we have a Discord server that I am in
We do.
far too much. There will be an invite link on this link sheet that is linked to in the description. You go there, you click on it, you answer some questions to make sure that you're not some kind of Chan bored nightmare person, and then you come in and get to talk to a whole bunch of trans people and non-binary people from all over the UK and the world. So yeah, come hang out, because I'm in there far too much, because it's more fun being there than doing much else. So check that out. And that's our show. Thank you very much for listening. Next week, we're going to have part 2 of our Cis Ally specials, where we talk to David Paisley, Scottish actor extraordinaire and antagonizer of the LGB Alliance, and also the mighty, mighty folk singer Grace Petrie, who's also let us play one of her songs because she's so great. So yeah, make sure you're here next week for that.
Until next time, same trans place. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This episode of What the Trans was produced by Michelle Snow and Ashleigh Talbot with assistance from Kate Glanfield. This episode was edited together by myself, by Person, and by Chai Tiefling. You'll be able to find details of where you can find them online in the link sheet as usual. And I would also like to thank our patrons, Vic Parsons, Joel Lewis, Tila Wild, Atom James, Vanessa Billington, Tower Watt, Rowan Littlejohns, Desiree Markland, Samantha Alice Raven, Patreon user Derek Victor, Sarah Bedful of Dogs Halliwell, Emma Doyle, Mike Dickinson, Owen Willis, Catherine, Elliot McVeigh, Cassius Adair, Tuck, Melissa Brooks, Ian Coomber, Maddie Bell, Karakan12, April Heller, Sophie Lewis, Alexandra Lilly, Claire Scott, Ariadne Pena, Lauren O'Nions, Matt Reynolds, Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean, and Lanos. Thank you very much.